opposite of Mormon. They use only 10% of the therefores and over 97% of the wherefores. These data would seem to challenge the notion of a single writer of the Book of Mormon. Indeed, some scholars once considered this as evidence of different writers, but they have since abandoned the idea. The anomaly is in the way therefore and wherefore are distributed within the writings of Mormon and Moroni. With respect to Mormon, again, who uses therefore overwhelmingly, he uses only wherefore in the two things he wrote outside of his abridgments. He wrote Words of Mormon, there it is, the two-page bridge between the books of Omni and Mosiah. He uses only wherefore four times in the words of, he uses only wherefore four times in the Words of Mormon. In the chapters leading up to the book of Mosiah, there are 17 pages, including Words of Mormon, containing 30 wherefores but no therefores. But in the book of Mosiah, which follows Words of Mormon and begins Mormon's abridgments, the first 28 pages contain 57 therefores without a single wherefore. It seems extremely unlikely that an author would by happenstance use 30 straight wherefores and suddenly switch to 57 straight therefores. With respect to Mormon's other writing outside his abridgments, he wrote 2 letters to his son Moroni, which Moroni included in his book of Moroni, the final book in the Book of Mormon. In the Book of Moroni, where Moroni uses only wherefore, Mormon uses wherefore in his 2 letters 11 times and no therefore, sounding just like Moroni and unlike himself throughout his abridgments. This, then, is the anomaly within the writings of Mormon. Outside of his abridgments, in which he uses therefore overwhelmingly, he uses only wherefore in Words of Mormon and his 2 letters to Moroni. Similarly, in Mormon's individual Book of Mormon, Mormon's final book, and in which he uses only therefore, we're talking about the small Book of Mormon right there. Moroni writes the last 2 chapters, you'll recall that, and like Mormon before him, uses only therefore 4 times. To recap, wherefore predominates from Nephi and Jacob through Mormon's Words of Mormon, then beginning with Mormon's abridgments with the Book of Mosiah, therefore predominates right through Mormon's own Book of Mormon, including Moroni's final 2 chapters of this book. Then beginning with Moroni's Book of Moroni, including Mormon's 2 letters, wherefore is used exclusively to the end of the book. In short, what determines which word is used is not the writer, but where it is used in the book. Remember that after the loss of the 116 pages, Joseph Smith began dictating the Book of Mormon from Mosiah, that's right at the beginning of the brown there, through to the end of the book, ending with Moroni's Book of Moroni, and then returned to the beginning of the book and proceeded from the book of Nephi through Mormon's Words of Mormon. So therefore occurs in the first part of the dictation, beginning with Book of Mosiah, and wherefore occurs in the last part of the dictation from the Book of Moroni through Words of Mormon. What is missing in this summary thus far is the Book of Ether, which follows Mormon's Book of Mormon with a predominance of therefores, and precedes Mormon's Book of Moroni with exclusively wherefores. It is in the Book of Ether that a changeover occurs from therefore to wherefore. In the first chapter of Ether, therefore occurs twice and wherefore not at all. In the second chapter, each word appears twice. When we arrive at the 10th of 15 chapters, there are no therefores, but 6 wherefores. There are also no therefores in chapters 11, 13, and 14, and only 1 each in chapters 12 and 15, while each of these chapters uses wherefore. By the end of the book of Ether, there has been a gradual changeover from a total of 24 therefores to 63 wherefores. Incidentally, even though Moroni and Nephi use 10% of the therefores, most of them are found in the book of Ether and in the 13 chapters from Isaiah that Nephi included in his writings. So it's a little misleading to talk about Moroni and Nephi using 10% or 10% of the therefores. Now these data demand an explanation, and the easiest one for me is that the odd distribution was by Joseph Smith's design, although it may be hard to believe. Why would Joseph Smith make such a subtle change, one that probably not even a careful reader would discover? If no one would notice it, why do it? But there is reason to believe that this is what he did. Just after the author started the book of Ether, he recognized that Moroni would be abridging the Jaredite record, and that he and Mormon would somehow have to sound different, just as he recognized in 3rd Nephi that the two Jesuses would have to sound the same. But how? There was no very voice of Mormon or very voice of Moroni. Joseph Smith couldn't change his whole writing style, and he had already used his idiom abundantly, like beginning sentences with behold and yea. Distinguishing between Mormon and Moroni would not be easy. He may have recognized that he had used therefore commonly throughout Mormon's abridgments, and that he had a ready substitute in wherefore. Indeed, the idea may have occurred to him just after dictating the first chapter of Ether, where he used therefore twice but not wherefore. In the second chapter, he used each word twice and eventually began to use wherefore more and more frequently. He continually slipped back to his customary therefore as he dictated the book of Ether, but by the end of the book, he had pretty much mastered the change, using therefore only twice in the last six chapters of the book of Ether, while using wherefore 38 times. He gave it no more thought during the rest of his dictation. Thus he didn't change wherefore to therefore in Mormon's 2 letters or in the later words of Mormon. What this suggests, I believe, like we saw earlier with verily I say unto you, is consciousness on the author's part of what he was doing. Might be hard to believe, but I don't know what other explanation there is. The distribution of therefore and wherefore does not seem to be divinely inspired. Okay, let's move to a third anomaly, which does not involve words but prophecies. There are many prophecies. There you go. About 40% of them have to do with events in world history that had already occurred when Joseph Smith dictated the book. I'll refer to these as past events. About 1/3 relate to events still to occur when Joseph Smith dictated the book, and I'll refer to these as future events. The remaining 1/4 or so relate to events within the book's narrative. I'll refer to these as internal events. The anomaly is that the prophecies of past and internal events differ from the prophecies of future events. With respect to the prophecies of past events, they are specific and unconditional, as if born of 20/20 hindsight. They describe events unconditionally destined to occur, as they all, in fact, had occurred by 1830. An example of prophecies of past events is Lehi's and or Nephi's prophecies that in 600 years the Lord God would raise up among the Jews a Savior of the world who would be born of a virgin in Nazareth to a woman named Mary, that his name would be Jesus Christ, that he would be baptized in Bethabara beyond the Jordan River, that he would select 12 apostles and heal the sick, that the Jews would not believe his gospel and would slay him, and that he would rise from the dead after 3 days. One anomaly within prophecies of past events is that names and places of sacred history are foreknown, like Mary, Jesus, Bethabara, and Nazareth, but not the names in secular history, like Columbus, who is, quote, a man among the Gentiles, and will discover the promised land, or the Atlantic Ocean, which is the many waters, on which other Gentiles will go forth to the promised land. Prophecies of internal events, by and large, clearly and accurately describe the subsequent Book of Mormon history, which had already been dictated when the prophecies were made, such as the appearance of Jesus in the promised land, the final civil war between the Nephites and the Lamanites, the destruction of the Nephites, and the survival of the Lamanites. By and large, the prophecies of internal events, like the prophecies of past events, are specific descriptions of events that subsequently and unmistakably occurred within the Book of Mormon narrative. Two major themes recur in the prophecies of future events. The first is the restoration of the house of Israel to the lands of their inheritance, which, unlike the prophecies of past events, is conditional, the most explicit of which is Jacob's, quoting the Lord, "When the day cometh that they, the Jews, shall believe in me, that I am Christ, then have I covenanted with their fathers that they shall be restored in the flesh upon the earth unto the lands of their inheritance." So when the Jews accept Jesus as the Christ, which is the condition, then they will be restored to the lands of their inheritance, that is, Israel. So, the present state of Israel is not the promised restoration, but as Marion G. Romney said in 1981 in a General Conference address, the state of Israel is a, quote, signal that the Jews would soon come to accept Jesus Christ as their Redeemer. The second theme is the carrying forth of the Book of Mormon to the Native Americans, to the rest of the world, which was within the control of Joseph Smith and his followers, such as that when the Book of Mormon comes forth, there shall be many which shall believe the words which are written, and they shall carry them forth unto the remnant of the seed of the people of Nephi. Other prophecies of future events are extrapolations of conditions existing in Joseph Smith's time, such as that the Gentiles will not destroy the seed of Nephi's brothers, that is, the Native American. Many prophecies are eschatological, describing the end times in familiar Christian terms, such as that the Holy One of Israel numbereth his sheep, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd, and Satan has no power and cannot be loosed for the space of many years. And many of the prophecies are general, whose meaning is unclear, such as Nephi's prophecy of the destruction of all nations that fight against the 12 apostles. What do these terms mean? The prophecies of future events are unimpressive in content and stand in sharp contrast to the prophecies of past events, which are largely specific, unconditional, and unambiguous. The prophecies of internal events are not much less so. The difference between specific, accurate prophecies and vague, less accurate prophecies is a key to scriptural scholars in determining when the prophecies were written, which would be in the early 19th century. There appear to be no prophecies in the Book of Mormon that the author could not have made. The last two anomalies are the shortest. The fourth anomaly occurs in the proper name. According to the Book of Mormon account, Lehi's party consisted of Jews who spoke Hebrew and left Jerusalem for the New World in 600 BC. The Jaredites, on the other hand, left the Tower of Babel in today's Iraq for the New World in about 2200 to 3100 BC. Mormon scholars differ on the date of the Tower of Babel, which is a fiction anyway. And they spoke an unconfounded language. Was this the pure Adamic language? Again, scholars disagree. In any case, the two peoples came from different parts of the world, at least 1,600 years apart, did not interact except for one person for 9 months, and spoke different languages. and yet they have 7 identical names. There you have it. Identical names, both peoples have. And they have 14 others that are nearly identical. That is, within 1 letter of each other. And here, Joe's going to put them up again. It seems highly unusual that these 2 peoples would share any names. We come to the last anomaly, a 5th one. Some Jaredites lived long lives. Corianton dies at age 142, and 5 kings beget children in their old age. Another has a child at an exceeding old age, another at an exceedingly great age, and 2 others at a good old age. I speculate that the author may have believed in the long lives noted in the Old Testament, including Methuselah, the longest lived of the patriarchs, who lived 969 years. But the long lives are also found among the Nephites, whose history comes long after the Old Testament patriarchs. Indeed, there are 3 instances of long lives among the Nephites. First, several times in the Book of Mormon, the period from Jesus' birth to the final civil war that destroyed the Nephites is stated to be both 400 years and 4 generations. But if a new generation begins every 25 years or so, 400 years would equal 16 generations and not 4. Could the author of the Book of Mormon have equated 1 generation with 100 years? Possibly. 4th Nephi notes that after 110 years, the first generation of Christ had passed away. And that after 200 years, the second generation had passed away, except for a few. Now, I'm speculating that the author may have assumed that someone born at the beginning of each new century would live at least 100 years, and added their ages together to arrive at 4 generations, or 400 years. But a father's and son's ages are not added together, since their lives overlap for much of their lives. Thus, if a father is 25 when his son is born, and dies when he is 72, their lives would overlap for 47 years. Here's the second instance of long lives among the Nephites. Nephi's younger brother Jacob gives the place to his son Enos, who writes that 179 years had passed since Lehi left Jerusalem, which was at most 7 years before Jacob was born. So Jacob's and his son Enos's lives spanned at least 172 years. Enos gives the plates to his son Jarom, who is Jacob's grandson, and writes that 238 years had passed away. So Jacob's and his grandson Jarom's lives spanned at least 231 years. Jarom gives the plates to his son Omni, Jacob's great-grandson, who writes that 282 years had passed away. So Jacob's and his great-grandson Omni's lives spanned at least 275 years, which is 11 generations and not 4. We have to guess the age of these 4 persons, since their ages are not given in the text. So let's guess the father in each generation is, say, 50 years old, rather than 25 when his son is born and his wife is still of childbearing age. Under this scenario, Jacob's son would live to be about 122, Jacob's grandson 131, and the great-grandson 125. Presumably to avoid these ultra-long lives, BYU law professor Jack Welch suggests that rather than 50, Jacob was probably about 63, Enos 77, Jarom 70, and Omni 50 when their sons were born. And, I must say, to much younger wives. Other apologetic scholars simply observe that many Nephites lived to a rather old age. Finally, The third instance of long lives among the Nephites occurs following Jesus' visit in the book of 4th Nephi. There are 4 authors of this book. The son of the Nephi who wrote the 3rd book of Nephi, whose name is also Nephi and is the only Nephi in 4th Nephi. Nephi's son Amos, and Amos's 2 sons Amos and Amram, who are grandsons of Nephi. The 3 generations from Nephi to his grandson Amram are even longer than those from Jacob to his great-grandson. According to the dates given in the book of 4th Nephi, if the father in each of these generations is 50 years old when his son is born, then Nephi lives to be about 96. His son Amos lives to be 130. Nephi's grandson Amos lives to be 191 years. And Nephi's other grandson Amram lives to be at least 206 years. Something is obviously wrong, but their shortest possible lives occur if they are all born in the year their father dies, although the mother would be much younger than the father, and the son would have to grow up before he could keep the record. In this scenario, the 2 grandsons would live to be 111 and 126. There are many more anomalies than these 5. They are found from a close examination of the book itself. This is not to say that I do not appreciate external evidence. The many books and articles I've read about linguistics, biographies, history, archaeology, DNA, and so forth are fascinating and by and large reflect good scholarship. This is the kind of evidence most people are familiar with, but none of it seems to be dispositive of the question of how we got the Book of Mormon. What comes closest, I believe, is the internal evidence, which is complete, as I've said, accessible, unchanging, and certain. In this paper, I've tried to give you a taste of what is available within the book itself. For those of us who do not base their beliefs on faith, but turn to evidence, I believe that the internal evidence will play a larger and larger role in our search for truth. We have 5 minutes for any questions.
No, we have more time. Okay. Before you do that, you have books here, don't you?
Yeah.
And where are they?
They're out at the desk in the front hall.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, if anyone wants them.
Any
Questions? Questions? Yeah, Joe?
It seems to me, if I remember correctly, that
Can you wait just one
therefore,
Just a minute, Joe. They're bringing around a...
I'm sorry. It seemed to me, Earl, in the wherefore, therefore, that at the same time that changes in ether, that Joseph Smith's revelations that he was having outside the Book of Mormon also changes. Am I remembering correctly?
I don't know.
I think Brent Metcalf deals with that in his article.
Does he?
I'm
Does
pretty
he?
sure.
I know he deals with wherefore and therefore, the ether book in particular.
Right, that's his priority in the Mosiah is what he uses.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that might be another explanation. I just don't know.
Okay.
So just continuing on the therefore or wherefore, have you done any research on possibly Oliver Cowdery's the one writing therefore and Joseph Smith's the one writing wherefore?
No.
Because if you could look at other writings, by Oliver Cowdery outside the Book of Mormon and other writings by Joseph Smith outside the Book of Mormon, I wonder if you see that one uses therefore in everyday speech and one uses wherefore.
Good thought, Miss.
Just a thought.
It's a thought, it's a thought. I mean, I could follow up on it, but I don't intend to.
Anybody else?
Thanks, Earl. You mentioned the "and it came to pass" as one of the distinguishing phrases of the Book of Mormon. Do you have anything else to share about that in terms of what it says to us? Because I'm just reading through the Book of Mormon for the first time, being a non-Mormon, and I'm curious about it. And it seems like that occurs in Nephi especially, at the beginning of almost every verse.
Yeah.
And and it came to passes and the yays, if there's anything that you can share with us about that.
Well, I wish there were. You know, what I've done is identified what seems to be a problem, but, and I've read a lot of apologetic works that address any number of things in the Book of Mormon, but I don't remember anything that addresses that. Sorry about that.
Seems like just lazy writing.
Yeah, that's the explanation I've heard many times.
Well, my understanding is too that they've deleted a lot of them from the book, and someone, oh well, I guess it was me that said it. Someone at BYU said that, and it came to pass was probably a single word in the Hebrew or the Reformed Egyptian or whatever. But I would counter that it's not just "and it came to pass," because "and it came to pass" comes in many ways. I mean,